Catholics are seriously a bunch of prudes. They go way too far with their morality. They're nothing but fundamental extremists. You know, it's one thing to condemn abortion, but I mean, come on, let's get real. To condemn artificial contraception, I mean, pretty much the entire world permits artificial contraception. You know, whom does it hurt? What is it? Is, is there anything wrong about artificial contraception? It's merely just helping people plan out their childbearing. And it seems like the Catholic Church is literally the only entity that condemns artificial contraception in the entire world. All right. Is artificial contraception permissible in marriage? That's what we're going to be looking at today and trying to answer. I met up with a really good friend a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't seen in about 14 years. And we talked for about 2 hours, and we talked about everything under the sun. And I was hoping religion would come up, and it did. It came up with, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes left in our conversation. We talked about Catholicism, the Bible, morality, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, he asked me, how many children do you have? And I said, I have 3 daughters. And he said, do you plan on having any more? And I said, that's up to God. And he said, wait, don't you have a matter in the say? Or a say in the matter, rather? Sorry. And yes and no. Yes and no. But I said, you know, the Catholic Church vehemently condemns artificial contraception as an intrinsic evil. And he, with alacrity, retorted with, where is that in the Bible? And then I retorted with, why do we need to go to the Bible? Where in the Bible does it say, where in the Bible? Nonetheless, I wanted to meet him where he was at. You know, he's a non-Catholic, genuine dude. And I went to Genesis and I quoted, be fruitful, multiply, that divine precept of procreation. And he said that has nothing to do with artificial contraception. Where does it forbid artificial contraception? And I actually conceded to him. I said, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it explicitly forbids artificial contraception when God says be fruitful and multiply. But nonetheless, we literally had like 5 minutes. I'm not making an excuse, but we had about 5 minutes before I had to go because I wanted to talk about this for about another 2 hours, if he was willing. So the Bible does actually condemn artificial contraception explicitly. I don't know if too many people know about this. Well, actually, before that, hold on to that for just a second. I just want to give you a little brief history of artificial contraception. So this has been around since the dawn of time. We have, as evidence bears out, I think this goes back like 2000 BC with the Egyptians. And they had methods of artificial contraception written on papyrus. For instance, they actually used condoms. They weren't made out of latex. They were made out of animal skin. They would poison the uteruses by using different things and to stop the conception and the pregnancy. And then they would use potions and a whole bunch of different things. So this isn't like new. This hasn't been around since 1930 or the 1960s. This has obviously been around for a while. So in Genesis, let's go back to Genesis where I quoted, be fruitful and multiply. This is the book where artificial contraception is condemned. Well, we have ample evidence where it's not pleasing to the Lord. And it actually goes back to Genesis 38, 6 through 11. So this is around the time of the 12 tribes of Israel. Judah, Benjamin, Naphtali, Simeon, etc., etc. I used to know all 12, and there's a situation going on here with Judah, I'll just give you a little context. You can read this for yourselves, but if you don't want to, if you're too lazy, I'll just give you the context and read you the actual passage from Genesis 38 that seemingly condemns artificial contraception. So before I read the passage, there was a thing called the Leverite Law. Maybe many of you know about this, but if the husband dies and the wife, the widow, is childless, the brother of the husband is supposed to marry her and procreate to keep the line and the descendants going for that brother. It would be a legal descendant for that dead brother. It's called the Leverite Law, and it was further legislated in the law of Moses. And there were penalties if you didn't fulfill this. So that's the context. So I'll just read 6 through 10, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So Genesis 38, verse 6, quote, "And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death." Now, pay attention. "Then Judah said to Onan, 'Go into your brother's wife,'" okay, that's code for intercourse, "and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." That's the Leverite Law. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Okay. So this is from a Protestant translation, the English Standard Version. So this is not from an Orthodox or Catholic Bible. It's from a Protestant Bible. Okay, there is a little bit of contention and some argument over why did the Lord kill Onan. Was it because of him breaking the Leverite Law? Or was it because of him performing an act of artificial contraception? Just basically the withdrawal method. Coitus interruptus. We'll get into that later. Well, if you know that it says in verse 10, what he did was wicked. Well, what did he do? What he did was he spilled his semen on the ground, thereby breaking the Leverite Law. But it was the act, the positive sin, the positive act of the withdrawal method that the Lord was displeased and killed him for. Okay, so there's our scriptural basis for the condemnation of artificial contraception. Okay, again, we don't have a lot in the Bible, but that has been used for a long time, very long time. Now let us go to two prominent theologians, one from the 5th century and one from the 16th century. So we got St. Augustine and then we got Martin Luther. Very powerful statements by these two individuals regarding contraception, and one of them relating it to Onan in Genesis 38. So this is St. Augustine in 419. And he says, quote, "I am supposing then, although you are not lying with your wife for the sake of procreating offspring, you are not for the sake of lust obstructing their procreation by an evil prayer or an evil deed. Those who do this, although they are called husband and wife, are not, nor do they retain any reality of marriage, but with a respectable name cover a shame. Sometimes this lustful cruelty or cruel lust comes to this, that they even procure poisons of sterility, oral contraceptives." Okay, that's St. Augustine on Marriage and Concupiscence, chapter 1. So that's St. Augustine. Now, regardless of which Christian affiliation you belong to, St. Augustine is most revered by most sects of Christianity and churches of Christianity. And he uses a strong language there. Now let's go to Martin Luther, 16th century. This to me is the kind of like the apex quote here. This is good. Listen. So this is Martin Luther in the 16th century. Quote, "The exceedingly foul deed of Onan," Genesis 38, "the basest of wretches, is a most disgraceful sin. It is far more atrocious than incest and adultery. We call it unchastity, yes, a sodomitic sin. For Onan goes into her, that is, he lies with her and copulates, and when it comes to the point of insemination, spills the semen, lest the woman conceives. Surely at such a time the order of nature established by God in procreation should be followed. Accordingly, it was a most disgraceful crime. Consequently, he deserved to be killed by God." Okay, now that is the most explicit condemnation of what Onan did, and he related it to violating the natural law of procreation. And you could tie that into violating the Leverite Law. Or, most importantly, displeasing God in a grave manner that you deserve death. Okay? So that's Martin Luther, that's St. Augustine. And then we had the Bible. Okay? So we got a little tradition, we got a little scripture there. Now let's go to the natural law. Okay? So the natural law, every Christian believes and confesses the reality of the natural law. The natural law is more or less a moral code or moral law written on our conscience and our hearts and our reason, so that we will be able to, regardless of our circumstances, what faith or creed or club or church or communion we belong to, we will be able to determine right versus wrong. For instance, by the natural law, objectively, regardless of religion, you could come to the conclusion that murder is wrong, okay? Theft is wrong, committing adultery is wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, unfortunately, some of these natural law situations are getting twisted, abortion, contraception, divorce. I mean, we can go on, and it's not really objective. It's becoming relatively subjective, which is not good, because that's why it's permitted, and that's why it's been legislated to be permitted. So that's basically the natural law. It's a moral code written on us naturally that we can determine what's right or wrong. Now, I want to bring up an analogy to kind of bring out why this is wrong, using the natural law, but using the anatomy of the body. So the human body has, I believe, 12 bodily systems, the muscular, the skeletal, the endocrine, the central nervous system, et cetera, okay? Now, to my knowledge, there are only two bodily systems that have a pleasure attached to them, and that's the digestive and the reproductive. And in a certain sense, they're the only two bodily systems that maintain life and transmit life. Now, you can make an argument for all the other systems maintaining life, obviously, because if not, you would be dead. So, the digestive system, right? It has a pleasure attached to it. You have hunger and thirst that gets satiated, and you have taste buds. God deliberately put a pleasure, or attached a pleasure, to entice you, to incline you to eat and drink, right? If there wasn't a pleasure, maybe we wouldn't eat. If there wasn't a hunger, maybe we wouldn't eat. I don't know. But there's at least is a pleasure there. Now, we all know that the means of chewing and swallowing and digestion, or drinking, that those are the means. But what is the end? The end is the nourishment to maintain your life, for all your other bodily systems. Now, what if we were to kind of separate the means from the end and just go for the means? namely the taste, the pleasure of the taste, and the satiation of our hunger and thirst, and then just divorce it from the end. So that would be gluttony, and it would be kind of akin to someone eating a bunch of food, right? Binging for all the tastes and all the pleasure and all the satiation, and then throwing it back up, you know? There's a term for that, but I don't want to trigger anybody. But yeah, but the point is by natural law, by the digestive system, we're not to do that, right? We are to eat and drink and let it digest and absorb and nourish our bodies so we can maintain our life. Okay, digestive system. Let's go to the reproductive system. Again, likewise, to my knowledge, this is the only one of two bodily systems that has a pleasure attached. Quite an intense pleasure, better than sex cake. Interesting. Digestive, procreation. But yeah, the reproductive system obviously has pleasure for both the woman and the man when they engage in the marital act. Okay, but again, the pleasure is attached to the means, not necessarily to the end. The pleasure is there to entice us and incline us to procreate, namely to propagate the human race. Okay, real quick side note. I remember talking to an atheist once, and we were debating religion, and I asked him, well, what is the point of life? You know what he said? To keep our species going. Yeah, that's the natural law. I mean, that's a huge purpose. Procreation. If we didn't procreate, we'd die out. So yeah. Anyways, that was a little digression, but yeah, the reproductive act, the conjugal act, is really important. The means, obviously the sexual intercourse and the pleasure that's attached to that for both parties leads to an end, and that should be a child. So that marital act gets a name 9 months later. I stole that quote. But yeah, think about that. Your conjugal act gets a name 9 months later. Okay, not every time. I get it. There's infertility periods. There's a whole bunch of different reasons you're not going to conceive, infertility, whatever. I get that. But we should always be open to life. And we'll get to that later. So, also in the marital and conjugal act, there are two elements or significances to the marital act. One is the unitive, like union, right? Scriptures say that when man and woman come together in marriage, they become one flesh. That's like one body, right? That's that unitive element, that unitive significance, right? So that's one element of the marital conjugal act. Well, there's another significance or element of the marital conjugal act, and that's the procreative significance, right? And that procreative significance, it should never, ever be separated. It's inseparable from the unitive significance, right? If you divorce those two and just reduce it to the means or to it's not really a unitive act, but if you take the procreative element out of it, you reduce each other to a tool or an instrument for pleasure alone. So basically, you're objectifying each other. Okay? Your marital act becomes a life-suppressing lust act. Like St. Augustine said, those who engage in artificial contraception, he calls it a lustful cruelty, a cruel lust that even procure poisons of sterility, So the dignity of the marital act should always be open, at least to life. That procreative significance should always be in union with the unitive element of the conjugal act. Okay? So yeah, let's not objectify each other for pleasure. You take the procreative element out of it and you're basically lusting. Had a little conversation with a gal many years ago whether it was permissible to lust over your spouse in the context of marriage. So you're married and you're lusting over your spouse. And she said, yeah, why not? You're married. It's not wrong. And at the time I said, no, 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 that doesn't sound right. But I couldn't give a good reason. Well, it's because I didn't know what lust meant. Well, what is lust? You know, like I guess people have different definitions of lust. But basically, lust is whether in your heart or mind or in an act of the will, you're objectifying someone for your own sexual pleasure. I mean, that's all it is. And when that happens in the marital act, you're reducing the marital conjugal act to an act of, again, life-suppressing lust. And that's a grave matter. So like St. Augustine said, in reality, you're not even married, in a sense. Kind of strong language. Maybe it's hyperbolic. I don't know. So, yeah. So should we always just, no matter what, have 10 to 12, 13, 14 children, regardless of, because it's like, well, you got to be open to life. You can't reduce it to lust. It's part of the natural law. I mean, look what happened to Onan and Martin Luther, what he said. Okay, so here's the thing. We just need to be open to life, okay? The key word in all of this is artificial contraception. Like the birth control pill, sterilization, injectables, the vaginal ring, condoms, coitus interruptus, that's just the withdrawal method, right? That's artificial, okay? What's the point of artificial contraception if it's not just to objectify your spouse and to meet a lustful end instead of a procreative end, right? Again, I'm not saying like everyone has that motive or intention, but objectively, that's more or less what you're doing. Yeah, and also I do remember real quickly, I remember talking with a gal, I said, contraception hates children. And she retorted with, why do you always bring up this morality, everything's religion tied and blah, 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 blah. But then she said, it's like, it's the woman can regulate and observe naturally her cycle. And I'm like, yeah. So as Catholics, as a Catholic, we are taught, our conscience and wills are bound to abide by this teaching that, we're always supposed to be open to life. However, if there is a just cause, or if there's a grave cause, we can do what's called natural contraception. That's probably not the best term, or natural family planning. Okay. My wife and I took a whole class on it. I remember most of it, and I don't want to get into details on it, but basically both, her or me, or both of us, can determine when she is ovulating, when she is fertile. So if we have a just cause, like we have a financial burden, or, mental illness, or maybe my wife's body is I don't know, going through some things, it's fragile, it could be a detrimental thing if we have another child. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reasons that are just to naturally avoid the fertile period. Okay? So it's kind of like abstaining from the fertile period. Okay? I'm not doing the withdrawal method. She's not taking a pill. So we're still open to life. So there is a very small percentage chance that we will conceive. It's small. It's actually, natural family planning is actually a higher success rate than artificial birth control of not conceiving. So just throwing that out there. But yeah, we have yet to try natural family planning, but, many, many couples do it. Many, many couples do it. I would just, stay away from the artificial stuff. And not only for moral reasons, but just the side effects and long term and short term side effects, and how it just, you know, how it can mess up the woman's reproductive system. You know, again, it depends on the person and what they're doing and what they're using, but I mean, I would kind of stay clear of that. So yeah. So this is dedicated to my friend. We had a great conversation. He wanted to know, why I can't use artificial contraception and where is that in the Bible. So I wanted to give him some biblical basis. I wanted to give him some quotes by a Catholic bishop and then a Protestant reformer. I could give more, but and then natural law. Okay. So all three of those are condemning artificial contraception. And real quickly, artificial contraception has always been condemned for the first 1900 years of Christianity. Always. Even Protestants. I read you a quote by Martin Luther. Calvin and Wesley also have quotes. I just don't have the time. It wasn't until 1930 that the Anglican Church, God bless the Anglicans, I'm not like pointing my finger judging them at all. They, in rare and exceptional cases, permitted artificial contraception. And then it just went haywire. It just blew up, and then everyone caved in. Protestants, that is, everyone caved in. And I don't know of any Protestant denomination that publicly confesses the condemnation of artificial contraception. I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong on that. I really would. But yeah, so the Catholic Church has never permitted artificial contraception ever. And, the same year that the Anglican Church permitted it, we actually came out in kind of a counteractive public promulgation, condemned it. So, yeah, I wouldn't use it. Pray about it. I'm not here to shove it down your throat and tell you what to do. But yeah, I think with those reasons, all those reasons, logic, reason, scripture, natural law, and quotes by some prominent theologians, I think we can come to the conclusion, and with evidence, that artificial contraception is an intrinsic evil and should never be used. So that's all I got. Love you guys. God bless. See you later.